So the focus of my current work is cultural awareness and identity performance in the legal profession. And what I'm looking to understand and achieve is really sort of two parts. The reality is, and the number has changed a little bit over the years, but the reality is that the legal profession is 81% white and 62% male. And the problem is that we just don't have meaningful conversations about that and the impact of that reality on the affected populations. We just don't have conversations about that in law school, and we need to. The second part is that we're also not preparing, in my opinion, we're not preparing students of all ethnicities to be mindful of the impact of that reality as well, whether they fall inside this statistic or outside of the statistic. They're walking into a global practice, and we're just simply not preparing them for how to navigate the realities of this identity performance. It's kind of interesting how I came across this work, and it's really quite personal, actually. I always think of it as a page of my own diary. While I was in law school, I did not have the tools or the language to sort of understand a lot of the various experiences that were happening to me. And I was just having really awkward, frankly, conversations and interactions with fellow students, with professors, that I couldn't really explain. And I didn't understand that, but I was constantly reminded that I was different. And that didn't change even when I went into practice. I was having really awkward sort of conversations or phrases sort of thrown at me from judges, from clients, from other practitioners. And again, I didn't have the tools and the language to know what to do with that. And in fairness, I don't think that the people who were harming me knew much better than I did. Like, none of us had the tools or the language. And so we just sort of ended up going our separate ways. And that's what needs to change. Like, we need to have the language and we need to have the tools. And when I think about the impact of this work beyond just sort of my own personal diary, if you will, when I fast forward, from my time in law school and then my time practicing, and I fast forward now, almost 20 years, nothing's changed. And that's the sad part, right? I'm still having students coming into my office that bear traditionally marginalized identities, and they're not talking about, their subjects in school, but they're talking about an experience that they had with a fellow peer, with a fellow colleague at work, with a judge, with a practicing attorney. And so it's not changing, right? And we're this long-standing noble profession. We're supposed to be change makers in the world, and we're also human, and we're just not training our students to remember that. We're not training each other to remember that and how to interact with each other as human beings. And so I want to do my part to stop having particular groups demonized, which is usually white males in these conversations. And I also want to stop being reminded, particularly as someone that's coming from a traditionally marginalized group, that I don't belong. I want both of those things to stop. And so when I think about the broader impact of this work, our society right now is very hyper about diversity. And that's not necessarily bad, but to be honest, I've never really been a fan of how we have approached this conversation. There is, in my opinion, from a lot of businesses and organizations, virtue signaling, and there's a lot of committees, and there's a lot of attempts from top down to legislate behavior. And some of those efforts are great, right? We need the leadership, but this is also a long game. It's a lot of individual work, and many people don't want to invest in the long game. They just sort of want this short game and this short impact. And that's just not the reality. So I'm really hopeful that the work that I'm doing will be impactful, not only in the legal profession, but also abroad.